everybody, I'm Alexis. Welcome back to my channel. So in this video, I want to talk about the difference between INTJs and ENTJs. I just did a video about the difference between INTJs and INTPs, so if you're interested in that, you can check that one out as well. I'll link it on the screen. So yeah, the difference between INTJs and ENTJs, they're actually very similar. And if you know about cognitive functions, you know they have all of the exact cognitive functions and they're just in a different order. So that's one reason that makes it difficult to tell the difference between those two. The two functions we're talking about, introverted intuition and extroverted thinking, neither one of those is particularly extroverted. I mean, introverted intuition is definitely not extroverted, but even extroverted thinking does not necessarily fit the public's standard definition of extroversion. I think if just like someone in the general public was going to describe extroversion, they're just going to say you like being around people and you get energy from being around people. And when you talk about extroverted thinking, that's not necessarily the case. Basically what it is that extroverts enjoy working with the outer world and get energy from working with the outer world. That may include people, but in the example of extroverted thinking, it oftentimes doesn't include people. It's more like they get energy from completing projects and getting things done and creating efficient systems that run really well. And leading and organizing groups of people, and being very efficient and being in charge of like themselves and others. And that is not really like the party animal style. So right off the bat, it can be kind of difficult to tell the difference because ENTJs might not even view themselves as extroverts. But however, with that being said, I think that there are some somewhat actually easy ways to tell the difference between the two of them. I've known not very many actually of these two types in the general population. To my knowledge, I think I've met maybe like 2 or 3 ENTJs and maybe 2 or 3 INTJs to my knowledge. Okay, so the first way to distinguish if you're trying to figure out if you're an INTJ or an ENTJ is I would really take a good look at how you were in childhood. And I don't mean like how your parents forced you to be, but when you were a child, if you had, free reign of your time and your activities and conversations you were having, you likely didn't, but if you could think about what your preferences would have been as a child, what would you have wanted to have spent your time doing when you were like 6, 7 years old? What would you want to be talking about? And the reason is because your first function is developed when you're younger, and then your second function doesn't start developing until maybe like junior high, high school. So once you get to like junior high, high school, you will develop more of the other one. So if you're an INTJ, you really had that introverted intuition from the beginning. And that may have looked like when I describe myself as a child, I would just sit there and do nothing. Even like as a baby, my parents said I would just sit there and not move and do anything. And as a child, I remember we lived on a lot of land and I would just go outside and I would just sit and I would just think. And I wasn't doing a lot of like playing, I guess, like other kids would. And just, left to my own devices, I liked to just sit and be in my mind. Whereas I've known some people that are extroverted thinking dominants, and in childhood, right from the get-go, they were already kind of organizing people and organizing their siblings and their parents and bossing people around. And in the classroom, they were doing that. And you can already kind of see like an extroverted thinking dominant person right from childhood. And then it's not until junior high, high school where you start developing that other side. So when you're younger, you seemed obviously like extroverted thinking or introverted intuition. And then once you were in like junior high and high school, that's when you started integrating the other function. So just think about which one were you first? Were you more of an organizer, take charge, initiating things first when you were young? Or were you more of the contemplative, lean back, don't get too involved in your body? Were you that type of kid? Okay, the second way to tell is that even though these types do have all the same cognitive functions, their cognitive function loops are very different. And basically the concept of a loop says that if you're an introvert, your comfort zone is introversion. So in times of being unhealthy, when you are really low on energy and you do not have the energy to go above and beyond, you're going to get even more in introversion. And the opposite is true of extroverts. So when extroverts are unhealthy, they're going to get even more into extroversion because you don't have energy to do things that are difficult for you, which for extroverts would be being in introversion. So if you think about in the case of the INTJ, if left to their own devices and they don't try to grow themselves at all, they're just kind of in their comfort zone, what INTJs can become is they have that NI-FI loop. And the FI is very idealistic and it's the opposite of extroverted thinking, so it doesn't really focus on getting things done. So when INTJs get in that loop, they become very stagnant, they can become very moody, they don't get anything done. They idealize all these projects and plans that they're supposedly going to do, but the TE is not there. So those plans are never evidenced. Things, they don't get things done, and they become very stagnant. And their other function is extroverted sensing. And since they're in an intense loop where they're relying heavily on that first function, introvert intuition, extroverted sensing is going to be completely shut out. So they probably are not going to be moving very much. They're going to be completely still, sitting on the couch all the time, just like researching and doing all their idealized planning. Now, they're not going to test any of it out in the real world with SE or TE, but they're just going to make this ideal plan that supposedly in their head, it's a masterpiece in their head. Now, they don't have any energy or work ethic, frankly, to get it done, but supposedly in their head, it's amazing. On the other hand, for ENTJs, their loop is extroverted thinking and extroverted sensing. And extroverted sensing is very quick and movement oriented. And what I see ENTJs doing more likely, if they're unhealthy and if they're not checking themselves and if they're not getting into that introverted space, they can tend to bulldoze people. They are in charge of way too many projects. They have tons of projects going on at one time. Maybe workaholism. They're not necessarily throwing themselves into extroversion in the sense of people, but they do throw themselves into workaholism, doing a lot of projects. They will start initiating a lot of things, a lot of rapid changes. Okay, we're gonna do this project and then this one and then this one. And there's not so much a slowing down with NI. NI is very slow to think about what was their future goal. They're just doing so many extroverted sensing, just like jumping around. They're gonna do so many projects. And there's not necessarily a sense of true presence. I've talked to ENTJs and just kind of registered that they're in a loop, and you never feel like they're quite with you. You know, you kind of feel like you're a stop in their agenda. Like they have 400 things to do today and you are just stop 287, and so you better get out of their way. And also, if they're going to be so much in extroverted thinking, they don't use any introverted feelings. So when the INTJ is unhealthy, they're going to really get into moping, that introverted feeling. Whereas the extroverted thinker, when they're in a loop, the ENTJ, they're not even consciously really aware of their emotions. They don't really stop to think twice about it. If someone really asks them about their feelings, like for example, if an extroverted feeler asks them like, hey, how are you doing? They're like, oh, fine, got a lot of stuff to do and I'm working on this and this is what I'm going to do. And they kind of just breeze right past it. And that is the difference with their inferior functions. Now, the way I've noticed inferior functions show up is just an absence in people's life. So for INTJs, there's going to be a strong absence left to just natural devices of SE. And for ENTJs, there's going to be a strong absence of FI. So in the INTJ, what an absence of SE could look like is maybe they're not showering, maybe they're not putting very much emphasis on their looks because they're like, what's the point? I'm just a floating mind. And that's kind of what INTJs can tend toward, is they're just a floating mind and they don't care about their body at all. They're not thinking about their body or how they physically look, what advertisement essentially they're sending to other people. And they're just very still. Left to their own devices, there's not a lot of movement in their life. SE is a lot about movement. And I do mean that physically, like there's not a lot of physical movement in their life. And in addition to that, I mean like they do not get the ball rolling if they're unhealthy with projects. And so it's going to be their tendency to slow down. And the ENTJ tendency would be to really speed up. INTJs do have introverted feeling third, so they are going to think about, like if an INTJ thinks of politics, there is going to be an element of FI which is going to influence their opinions about it. And they do think about their inner feelings. It is usually in a negative way, but they definitely are conscious of what their feelings are and how other people perceive them and their reputation, but they're not going to be as likely to try to pivot as often. ENTJs are going to be a lot more likely to pivot and change directions, whereas INTJs are going to be a lot more tunnel vision. There's this one thing we want to do, and we're going to go right toward that thing. And we're not going to put all of our eggs in a bunch of different baskets. We're putting all of our eggs in this basket, and that better work. Whereas ENTJs, they have that extroverted sensing, and that can be their tendency, is to really get into extroverted sensing. What they don't have is really that introverted feeling, and they do not tend to pay attention to their emotions. I think they are very good at understanding this is what my goal is and I want to make this much money. I'm not going to stop and think about, is this something I really want to be doing? It's just, like this would be cool to do it and I can get hired for doing it and I can make a lot of money doing it. Okay, I'm going to do it. And it's not really until that goes on for a while that they're really thinking, oh, maybe I'm not liking this. Like they don't tend to even really think like, do I like this or not? They just kind of keep on going. And it can be hard sometimes, since they don't have that introverted feeling, I think, to build like meaningful relationships with people. A lot of ENTJs that I've seen have a lot of acquaintances, and they have a lot of people they can call on as resources. They have a huge network. But what I don't see from them, unless they're very intentional, is a depth of personal relationships. They have tons of work relationships and networking, but it seems like in personal relationships, they center their relationships around people that are fun. I think they center it more around SE sort of people. They just have fun with their SE. Their relationships are not centered around their FI. From what I've seen, they do not sit around talking about, besides maybe with very, very few people, what's really going on in their lives. It seems like they mostly just have fun, casual relationships. And so I think that's going to be a difference is, do you have a huge, vast network? Because ENTJs have big networks, whereas I think INTJs don't really. I think INTJs would aspire to have big networks, and as time goes on throughout their life, they will naturally build them, but I've seen very young ENTJs with huge networks. Another way to tell is, I don't know if this is the best way to describe it, but it's like ENTJs are playing on the offensive and INTJs are playing on the defensive. And I want to explain what that means. So ENTJs, I've noticed they do a lot of initiating. They will initiate projects. If there is a job and there's a workforce, ENTJs immediately volunteer, like, I'm going to do this, and they kind of immediately start delegating. They really take charge in a situation like that. Even if they're relatively new, like, they don't even need time to warm up to people. They're just like, okay, yep, I'll organize you guys. Whereas the INTJ, it's like, they will assume leadership roles. They do have TE, but it's going to be a lot less often. They kind of have this idealization that's like, I want to really do the job well, and so they're not going to be as likely to just immediately jump on it. And they're constantly kind of hoarding their energy anyway, so they're like, I don't know if I have enough energy to really do this and manage all these people and do all this. But if push comes to shove, they will do it. And I think both types could be good leaders, but INTJs are not going to be as likely to step up all the time. There's going to be probably one sector of their life, and they are showing massive leadership in that area, and probably not any other areas. Okay, now maybe I'll just go through just kind of like the impressions or vibes that I get from each one. One thing is just in the way that they dress. I think ENTJs dress a little bolder. And that's just something you could characterize ENTJs with in general. They are a little bolder than INTJs. And the healthier these two types are, the closer they will look to one another. So if you look at a really healthy INTJ, you can tell they are an introvert. If you look at a really unhealthy ENTJ, you can tell they are extrovert because they are so much in that SE. But one thing to note is that the ENTJ, like, they just dress really bold. Just like with the way they dress. I think they are willing to take a little bit more risks, like with their fashion choices. I see them wearing a little bit bolder things, brighter colors than INTJs. INTJs have a very minimal aesthetic. I've noticed when I've seen INTJs, their homes are very minimal, their dress is very minimal. It's like very minimal and sleek. Whereas ENTJs still have that kind of sleek, professional-ish, modern vibe, but it's a little bit more flamboyant. I don't know. They're a little bit more willing to do trendy things. You know, like INTJs I see wearing more timeless things. Whereas I think the ENTJs are a little bit more likely to take risks with style, because I think when I see dominant SE users, they are wearing bright colors. And I don't see ENTJs wearing very many bright colors, but more color than just black. Like INTJs I know are just all black and gray, without exception, actually. I don't even know that many. 3 for 3. And the ENTJs I know, they will wear like a bright blue. I've seen a lot of blue from them. I would say still neutral colors, but more neutrals than just black and gray. One thing I've noticed about these two types, they both walk pretty fast. But when ENTJs walk fast, they get their arms into it more, and they're like always carrying something. They are like on a mission is the way to describe the way ENTJs walk. INTJs also walk quickly, but it's not so much like the on a mission. It's just like, let's just be efficient. Let's just get there. Let's stop expending energies. Let's just get there. But I don't think INTJs, we're not moving our arms really as much. One thing I've noticed is I've worked with a ENTJ. I was like the assistant sort of an ENTJ for a while, and she would always talk about, like, I would have like an idea. She's like, yeah, but people are not going to want to do that. She's like, people are not going to want to put in that much work, so we need to make it really easy for them. And she's like, and I think we need to incentivize them. So let's buy them all coffee, and we'll bring that to them. And so I think ENTJs understand a little bit more the leverage and like how to leverage people, whereas INTJs are a little bit more leaning on their ideals. Well, they're like, this is the perfect ideal plan, so we're going to go with the ideal plan. But ENTJs are like, no, that would be the ideal plan, but because other people are not going to buy in, it's not the ideal plan. And so I think ENTJs are a little bit more, practical in the sense of like, we need to leverage these people and we need to take these people into account. Like, sure, that way in theory is faster, but we need to keep this relationship with these people going on for a long time. So we need to take care of them, SE wise. Let's get them coffees. We'll make it a little fun for them, and then they'll be more willing to work with us in the future. And they're a little bit more flexible. They're like, oh, people aren't liking this. Okay, we'll just pivot. Okay, we'll do this. And they will kind of ask around, like, what do you guys want to do? And when they kind of figure out, like, okay, this seems to be the consensus that people want to do, we're moving forward in this way. Where I think INTJs are a little bit less likely to pivot. It's like, I sat there for 4 weeks, 8 hours a day, thinking about this plan and thinking about this option and this option and this one. And I thought about all of the options. And now the masses don't want to agree with what I'm doing. Like, I don't want to pivot. Like, I think INTJs are going to be a lot less likely to pivot because they spent so much time making the decision, whereas the ENTJs don't take so long making decisions. And so if they're like, oh, these people they've got a good idea, sure, let's do that. And they're a lot more likely to drop it. Okay, so that's the difference between ENTJs and INTJs. If you haven't seen my video on INTPs and INTJs, go ahead and take a look at that one. And that one I get more into the way they like argue and religion and things like that. So yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.